In the golden glow of crystal chandeliers at the Tourism Excellence Awards ceremony, Kiana Joseph watched her husband accept his third consecutive Visionary Leader trophy, knowing that every vision he claimed as his own had first lived and breathed in the sacred spaces of her brilliant mind. The applause thundered through the ballroom like a symphony of lies. Samuel Lucas stood at the podium, his perfectly tailored tuxedo catching the spotlight as he raised the gleaming award above his head. His smile was practiced, confident, the expression of a man who believed his own mythology. Behind him, a massive screen displayed the Lucas Luxury Tours logo, the company that had revolutionized cultural tourism and made them millionaires. Kiana sat at table 7, her emerald silk gown flowing around her like liquid fire. At 36, she possessed the kind of beauty that commanded respect rather than mere attention. Her dark skin glowed under the soft lighting, and her eyes held depths that spoke of wisdom earned through years of quiet observation and strategic brilliance. She applauded politely, her movements graceful and controlled, while inside her chest, something powerful stirred like a sleeping dragon beginning to wake. "Ladies and gentlemen," Samuel's voice boomed through the sound system, "I stand before you tonight as living proof that the American dream is alive and well. 10 years ago, I had nothing but an idea and the determination to see it through. Today, Lucas Luxury Tours operates in 37 countries and has redefined what it means to experience authentic cultural immersion." The crowd erupted again. Kiana's fingers tightened almost imperceptibly around her champagne glass. 10 years ago, Samuel had indeed had nothing but an idea. What he hadn't mentioned was that the idea had been hers, whispered to him during pillow talk, after she'd spent months researching sustainable tourism practices and cultural sensitivity protocols. The determination he spoke of had been her late nights, her phone calls to international contacts, her careful cultivation of relationships with local guides and cultural experts across 6 continents. Noah, their 9-year-old son, sat beside her in his miniature tuxedo, his intelligent eyes moving between his parents with the kind of awareness that made Kiana's heart ache. He leaned close to her ear, his whisper barely audible above the applause. "Mama, why doesn't Daddy mention you when he talks about building the company?" The question hit her like a perfectly aimed arrow. She touched his cheek gently, her smile soft but her eyes suddenly fierce with maternal protection and suppressed truth. "Sometimes, my love, the most powerful people work behind the scenes, but that doesn't make their contributions any less important," as Samuel continued his speech, weaving tales of his entrepreneurial courage and innovative thinking. Kiana found herself remembering fragments of their early days. She remembered the night she'd mapped out their first cultural immersion experience, designing every detail from the welcome ceremony to the farewell celebration. She remembered the hours she'd spent learning conversational phrases in 12 different languages so she could communicate directly with potential partners. She remembered sacrificing her own dream of opening a cultural consultancy to pour all her energy into Samuel's vision, believing that their success would be shared success, their triumph a mutual victory. The irony was exquisite and painful. The woman who had architected every innovation Samuel was being celebrated for tonight sat in the audience like a beautiful ornament, her genius invisible to everyone except the international business leaders who whispered requests for private consultations and the cultural ambassadors who sought her guidance on sensitive protocols. "I want to thank my beautiful wife, Kiana," Samuel said suddenly, and her attention snapped back to the present, "for being my rock, my inspiration, and the woman who keeps our home running smoothly while I focus on building our empire." The applause was warm, appreciative. Kiana stood gracefully, offering a radiant smile and a small wave. Inside, she felt something crack, not from heartbreak, but from the pressure of containing her own immense power within the small space Samuel's narrative had allowed her to occupy. She was not his rock or his inspiration. She was the architect, the strategist, the diplomatic genius who had made his empire possible. But tonight, like every night for the past decade, she would smile and accept the role of supportive wife, while her true contributions remained invisible. As they returned to their seats, her phone buzzed discreetly. A text from an international tourism director. Mrs. Joseph, several board members are interested in discussing a potential partnership with you directly. Are you available for a private meeting next week? She glanced at the message, then at Samuel, who was basking in the congratulations of their table mates. The irony was not lost on her that while her husband collected awards for her work, the industry's most powerful players were quietly reaching out to the real architect of Lucas Luxury Tours' success. Noah tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, that man wants to talk to you." She looked up to see a distinguished gentleman approaching their table. He was one of the most respected figures in international tourism, a man whose approval could make or break companies. "Mrs. Joseph," he said, his voice respectful, "I hope you don't mind my approaching you directly, but I've been following your work for years. The cultural sensitivity protocols you developed have become the gold standard in our industry. Several of us have been hoping to discuss some opportunities with you." Samuel's head turned sharply, his expression suddenly alert and possessive. "Great to see you. I'm always happy to discuss new opportunities." The man smiled politely, but kept his attention focused on Chiana. "Actually, Samuel, I was hoping to speak with your wife. The innovations I'm referring to specifically came from her expertise in cultural anthropology and diplomatic relations." The moment stretched between them, pregnant with unspoken implications. Chiana felt the weight of choice settling on her shoulders like a mantle of destiny. She could deflect, redirect the conversation back to Samuel, maintain the careful balance that had preserved their marriage for a decade, or she could step forward into the light that had always been rightfully hers. "I'd be honored to discuss it with you," she said, her voice steady and confident. "Perhaps we could arrange a meeting next week." Samuel's hand found her arm, his grip just a little too tight to be casual. "Sweetheart, you know how busy our schedule is right now with the holiday season approaching," but the gentleman was already extending his business card to Chiana. "Mrs. Joseph, I believe you'll find our proposition quite interesting. We're looking for someone with your particular combination of cultural expertise and strategic vision to head up our new International Relations division." As she took the card, Chiana felt something shift in the atmosphere around their table. The other guests had fallen silent, watching this unexpected exchange with interest. Samuel's jaw was tight, his politician's smile beginning to strain at the edges. "Thank you," Chiana said simply, slipping the card into her purse with movements that spoke of decision rather than politeness. The evening continued around them, but something fundamental had changed. Samuel made an effort to steer conversations back to himself, but Chiana noticed how other industry leaders kept gravitating toward her end of the table. They asked subtle questions about her background, her thoughts on emerging markets, her opinion on cultural preservation versus tourism development. Each question revealed how much they knew about her real role in Lucas Luxury Tours' success, and how little Samuel's public narrative reflected reality. During the dinner service, Noah observed everything with the sharp intelligence that never failed to amaze Chiana. When Samuel excused himself to network with other award recipients, Noah moved closer to his mother. "Mama, why do all these important people want to talk to you instead of Daddy?" Chiana considered her answer carefully. "Because, my darling, sometimes the person who does the real work isn't the same person who gets the credit for it." "That doesn't seem fair." "No, it doesn't. But fairness isn't something that's given to you, Noah. It's something you have to take for yourself when the time is right." As the evening drew to a close, Chiana found herself surrounded by business cards and invitations. The message was clear. The industry's power brokers saw her as Samuel's secret weapon, the brilliant mind behind his public success. They wanted to work with her directly, to access her expertise without going through her husband's ego and his tendency to take credit for her innovations. Samuel returned as the final speeches concluded, his face flushed with champagne and praise. He slipped his arm around Chiana's waist, pulling her close in a gesture that was both affectionate and possessive. Ready to go home, beautiful. This has been quite a night. Yes, Chiana replied, her voice soft but her eyes holding a new kind of fire. It certainly has been. As they collected their coats and said their goodbyes, Chiana felt the weight of all those business cards in her purse. Each one represented a door, a possibility, a chance to step out of Samuel's shadow and into her own power. The question that remained was whether she had the courage to walk through one of those doors, knowing that doing so would change everything between them forever. Walking toward their car under the stars, with Noah between them and Samuel's arm still around her shoulders, Chiana Joseph made a decision that would reshape their lives. Tomorrow she would begin making phone calls. Tomorrow she would start exploring what it might mean to be recognized for her own genius rather than being credited as someone else's inspiration. Tonight was perfect, Samuel said, his voice filled with satisfaction. Did you see how everyone wanted to congratulate us on our success? Chiana smiled, her expression serene but her mind already moving toward a future Samuel couldn't yet imagine. Yes, darling. I saw exactly who wanted to congratulate whom, and it was very illuminating indeed. Chapter 2, The Architect's Blueprint. While Samuel slept off his celebration, Chiana Joseph sat in her home office before dawn, surrounded by 10 years of evidence that she hadn't just supported an empire, she had designed it brick by brick, dream by dream, with the precision of a master architect building a cathedral of success. The clock on her mahogany desk read 4:30 in the morning. Outside, the December air was crisp and still, the kind of quiet that comes just before the world awakens to possibilities. Chiana sat cross-legged on the Persian rug, wearing silk pajamas and a cashmere robe, surrounded by banker's boxes she'd retrieved from the storage room. Each box contained pieces of the puzzle that was Lucas Luxury Tours' real origin story. She opened the first box with reverent care, as if handling archaeological treasures. Inside lay manila folders stuffed with documents that told the truth Samuel's public narrative had erased. Her original business plan, handwritten on legal pads during countless late nights while Samuel slept. Market research reports she'd compiled after teaching herself advanced analytics. Sketches of logo designs, all in her distinctive handwriting, including early versions of what would become the Lucas Luxury Tours brand identity. The second box revealed correspondence that painted a picture of painstaking relationship building. Letters to cultural centers across 6 continents, written in her careful script on their personal stationery. Email printouts showing months of negotiations with local guides, artisans, and cultural ambassadors. Each exchange demonstrated not just her linguistic abilities, but her intuitive understanding of cross-cultural communication protocols that had become Lucas Luxury Tours' signature strength. Noah's soft footsteps on the hardwood floor announced his presence before he appeared in the doorway, his hair sleep-tousled and his eyes bright with curiosity. At 9 years old, he possessed an emotional intelligence that sometimes startled Chiana with its depth. "Mama, why are you up so early?" She patted the rug beside her, inviting him to join her archaeological expedition through their family's hidden history. "I'm remembering things, baby. Important things that got forgotten along the way." Noah settled beside her, automatically reaching for one of the folders. His reading skills were advanced for his age, and as he scanned the documents, his young face grew thoughtful. "Mama, this says you wrote the whole business plan, but Daddy always says he created the company by himself." The innocence of his observation hit her like a physical blow. Her child could see what the business world had chosen to ignore, that Lucas Luxury Tours had emerged from her mind. Her research, her vision of what ethical tourism could become. Sometimes, Noah, people remember stories the way they want them to be, not the way they actually happened. She pulled out a thick folder labeled Cultural Sensitivity Protocols and opened it to reveal her handwritten framework for respectful tourism practices. This document had become the foundation for every tour Lucas Luxury offered, the secret sauce that set them apart from competitors who treated local cultures as entertainment rather than heritage to be honored. Her phone buzzed insistently on the desk. Even at this early hour, messages were arriving from international partners. A cultural center director from Peru asking for her input on a new archaeological site tour. A traditional craft cooperative from Morocco requesting her guidance on expanding their artisan workshops. An indigenous community leader from New Zealand seeking her advice on balancing cultural preservation with sustainable tourism revenue. Each message was addressed to her personally, not to Lucas Luxury Tours. Each sender understood that Kiana Joseph was the real architect of the company's culturally conscious approach. They came to her because they trusted her integrity, her commitment to ensuring that tourism benefited local communities rather than exploiting them. "Look at this. Noah," she said, pulling out a photo album she'd compiled during their early tours. The pictures showed her working alongside local guides, learning traditional weaving techniques from master artisans, participating in ceremonial dances with indigenous elders. In every image, she was actively engaged, learning, building relationships that would become the foundation of Lucas Luxury Tours' global network. Noah studied the photos with growing amazement. "Mama, you did all this work, but Daddy gets all the prizes." "Yes, he does. That's not fair." "No, it's not. But fairness isn't something that happens to you, sweetheart. It's something you create for yourself." She opened her laptop and showed him spreadsheets she'd maintained meticulously over the years. Financial projections she'd calculated, market analyses she'd conducted, operational efficiency improvements she'd designed. Every metric that had contributed to Lucas Luxury Tours' profitability bore her invisible fingerprints. The most painful discovery came in the third box, a folder labeled Future Plans in her own handwriting. Inside were detailed proposals for expanding into cultural education programs, artisan mentorship initiatives, and sustainable development partnerships. Dreams she'd shared with Samuel during Pillow Talk, only to see him present them to investors as his own innovative thinking. "I remember when you told Daddy about the art school idea," Noah said, pointing to one of her proposals. "You were so excited about helping those pottery makers in Guatemala start their own workshops." Kiana's breath caught. She'd forgotten that Noah had overheard that conversation, had witnessed her enthusiasm for creating opportunities that would empower local artists, while enhancing tourists' understanding of traditional crafts. Samuel had dismissed the idea initially, calling it too complicated. 6 months later, he'd presented it to their board as his own initiative. Complete with financial projections Kiana had secretly prepared. Her computer chimed with an email marked urgent. The message was from their accountant, forwarding documents Samuel had requested regarding business valuations and asset distribution. Kiana's hands trembled slightly as she opened the attachments. Legal papers outlining procedures for dissolving business partnerships, financial assessments that seemed designed to minimize her contributions to the company's value. The evidence was unmistakable. Samuel wasn't just planning to take credit for her work. He was planning to erase her from the business entirely. Noah was reading over her shoulder, his young mind processing implications that would have escaped many adults. "Mama, is Daddy trying to steal your company?" The directness of the question forced Kiana to confront the reality she'd been avoiding. "Not steal, exactly, but he's trying to make it seem like I never helped build it." "That's lying." "Yes, it is." She closed the laptop and pulled Noah closer. feeling the weight of decisions that would affect both their futures. Around them, the evidence of her true contributions to Lucas Luxury Tours created a paper fortress of truth. Every document, every photo, every email represented hours of work, creativity, and strategic thinking that had been systematically erased from the company's official history. "What are you going to do, Mama?" Kiana looked at her son's trusting face and felt something crystallize in her chest. Not anger exactly, but a fierce protective love, combined with a recognition of her own power that she'd kept hidden for too long. "I'm going to make sure the truth gets told, baby. I'm going to make sure people know who really built this empire." As the sun began to rise outside her office windows, casting golden light across the scattered documents, Kiana Joseph began to plan her revolution. Not a campaign of destruction, but a carefully orchestrated revelation of truth that would restore her rightful place in the story of Lucas Luxury Tours' success. Her phone rang, displaying the number of the industry leader who'd approached her at the awards ceremony. She let it go to voicemail, but the message was clear. The tourism world's power brokers were ready to acknowledge her genius, with or without Samuel's blessing. "Are you scared, Mama?" Kiana considered the question seriously. Fear was certainly present, but it was overshadowed by something much stronger: the exhilarating recognition of her own capabilities and the righteous fury of a woman whose contributions had been systematically minimized. "No, sweetheart. For the first time in years, I'm not scared at all. I'm ready." As Noah helped her organize the documents back into their boxes, Kiana felt the shift happening within her. The supportive wife who had sacrificed her own ambitions was transforming into something more powerful. A woman who understood her worth and was prepared to claim it, regardless of the cost. The question isn't whether Samuel's plans would succeed, Noah. The question is whether he's prepared for what happens when the real architect of his empire decides to build something of her own. Chapter 3. The Gathering Storm. The first Christmas guests arrived at the Lucas mansion, carrying gifts and warm wishes. But they entered a house where the most dangerous present had already been unwrapped. A woman's recognition of her own buried power waiting to explode into the light. By noon, their sprawling home had filled with the complicated dynamics that always accompanied Lucas family gatherings. Samuel's parents dominated the living room, with their familiar mixture of warmth toward their son and polite condescension toward Kiana. His mother, a woman who'd never worked outside the home, but somehow felt qualified to judge those who did, held court near the fireplace, while his father pontificated about business strategies he'd learned from cable television. Kiana moved through the house like a graceful conductor orchestrating a complex symphony. She'd spent the morning preparing traditional holiday foods from multiple cultures, a culinary diplomacy that reflected her deep understanding of how food could bridge differences and create connection. The aromas of spiced lamb from Morocco, traditional tamales from Mexico, and southern cornbread from her own heritage filled the air with promises of abundance and celebration. Noah stayed close to her side, helping carry platters and observing the family dynamics with his characteristic intensity. He'd inherited her gift for reading between the lines, for understanding the subtext that adults thought they were hiding behind polite conversation. "Kiana, dear," Samuel's mother called from her throne-like position on the sofa, "this spread is lovely, but don't you think it's a bit much? Samuel always says you tend to overcomplicate things." The comment was delivered with a smile, the kind of verbal knife wrapped in silk that women like Samuel's mother had perfected over decades of maintaining social hierarchies. Kiana felt Noah tense beside her, his protective instincts activated by the slight. "I believe in honoring the cultural traditions that have shaped our family's success," Kiana replied evenly, her voice carrying just enough emphasis to remind everyone present that Lucas Luxury Tours' reputation was built on cultural appreciation rather than cultural appropriation. Samuel's business partner arrived with his wife, both of them gravitating immediately toward Chiana rather than their host. The partner pulled her aside for a quiet conversation that left Samuel watching from across the room with narrowed eyes. "Chiana, I have to ask you something in confidence," the partner said, his voice low but urgent. "Are you aware that several of our biggest clients have been asking specifically to work with you on their upcoming projects? They're requesting direct access to your expertise, bypassing Samuel entirely." The information wasn't surprising, but hearing it confirmed felt like validation and warning simultaneously. "I appreciate their confidence in my work. It's more than confidence. They're talking about offering you independent contracts, big ones, the kind that could set you up with your own consulting firm if you were interested." Samuel appeared at her elbow with the timing of a man who'd been watching their conversation carefully. "I hope you're not trying to poach my wife," he said with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "Chiana's got her hands full managing our household and supporting my work." The partner's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a look that said he'd heard the dismissive undertone and filed it away for future reference. "Of course. I was just mentioning how impressed our clients are with her cultural expertise." As the afternoon progressed, Chiana noticed a pattern emerging. Samuel's relatives and longtime friends continued to treat her as an attractive accessory to his success, but the business associates and industry contacts engaged with her as a professional equal. The divide was becoming more pronounced with each interaction, creating two distinct camps within their own Christmas gathering. Noah appointed himself as her unofficial assistant, staying close enough to hear conversations while appearing to focus on his own activities. During a lull in the socializing, he pulled her into the kitchen for a private moment. "Mama, why do Grandma and Grandpa act like you're not smart enough to understand business, but all the important business people want to talk to you about work?" The question demonstrated his remarkable ability to identify hypocrisy and inconsistency in adult behavior. Because some people see what they want to see, and other people see what's actually there. "What do you see when you look at yourself?" Chiana paused, struck by the profound simplicity of his question. For years, she'd seen herself through Samuel's eyes, through his family's expectations, through the limiting role of supportive spouse that she'd accepted as the price of marital harmony. But today, surrounded by evidence of her own capabilities and faced with recognition from people who understood her value, she was beginning to see something different. "I'm starting to see someone I'd forgotten existed," she admitted. "Someone who's capable of much more than I've been allowing myself to believe." The kitchen door swung open, and Samuel's father entered with the confident stride of a man accustomed to being heard. "Chiana, I wanted to have a word with you about something that's been concerning me." She braced herself for whatever wisdom he felt compelled to share. Samuel's father had a talent for offering unsolicited advice wrapped in paternalistic concern. "Some of the fellows at my club have been asking questions about Samuel's business, specifically about your role in operations. I told them you help out with the woman's perspective on things, but they seemed to think you were more involved than that." The implication was clear. He was giving her a chance to correct any misunderstandings about her actual contributions before they became problematic for Samuel's reputation. "I contribute whatever expertise I can to support our family's success," she replied diplomatically, but Noah was watching her with an expression that clearly asked why she wasn't telling the whole truth. "That's good to hear. Samuel's worked so hard to build his reputation, and we wouldn't want any confusion about leadership roles to undermine his authority in the industry." After he left, Noah looked at her with disappointment that cut deeper than any adult criticism could have. "Mama, why didn't you tell him about all the work you showed me this morning?" The honest question from her 9-year-old son forced Chiana to confront an uncomfortable truth. She'd been complicit in her own erasure, accepting a supporting role in a story she'd actually authored. Her silence hadn't been kindness or diplomacy. It had been a form of self-betrayal that was teaching her son to minimize his own worth by example. "You're right to call me out on that, Noah. I should have told him the truth." "Why didn't you?" "Because I've been afraid that telling the truth would hurt people I love. But I'm starting to think that not telling the truth is hurting us more." The sound of Samuel's laughter drew their attention back to the living room, where he was entertaining guests with stories about his latest business triumph. Chiana listened from the doorway as he described negotiations she'd conducted, strategies she'd developed, and relationships she'd cultivated. Each detail was accurate, except for one crucial element. He'd replaced her role in every story with his own. "That's when I realized," Samuel was saying, "that the key to international business is understanding cultural nuances. It's not enough to offer a good product. You have to demonstrate respect for local traditions and values. That's why Lucas Luxury Tours has been so successful in markets where other companies have failed." The irony was breathtaking. He was describing her cultural anthropology training, her sensitivity to cross-cultural communication, her insistence on ethical tourism practices. But in his version of events, these insights had emerged from his own brilliant analysis rather than from years of her specialized education and experience. One of the guests, a woman Chiana didn't recognize, raised her hand with a question. "Samuel, I'm curious about how you developed such sophisticated cultural competency. Do you have formal training in anthropology or international relations?"
Oh,
The moment stretched as Samuel searched for an answer that wouldn't reveal the truth about the source of his supposed expertise. Chiana felt a surge of something that wasn't quite anger, but wasn't quite amusement either. It was the feeling of watching someone paint themselves into a corner using brushes you'd provided. "Well," Samuel began, "I've always been naturally intuitive about people and cultures. It's really about having an open mind and being willing to learn from every experience." The answer was generic enough to avoid outright lies while maintaining his narrative of innate genius. But Chiana could see some of the guests exchanging glances that suggested they found his explanation less than convincing. Noah tugged at her sleeve. "Mama, are you going to let him keep lying about your work?" His whispered question carried the weight of a generational challenge. What kind of example was she setting for her son about standing up for truth, about claiming credit for his own achievements, about refusing to be diminished by people who should honor his contributions? "No, sweetheart," she whispered back, feeling something fundamental shift in her chest. "I'm not going to let him keep lying about my work." As the gathering continued around them, Chiana Joseph made a decision that would change everything. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve, and she would give Samuel a gift he would never forget. The truth about who had really built the empire he claimed as his own legacy. The storm that had been gathering in Chiana's mind all day was about to break, and everyone in Samuel's carefully constructed world was about to discover what happened when a woman stopped protecting a man's ego and started protecting her own truth. Chapter Sure, the last Christmas Eve of lies as Christmas. Eve morning dawned with snow falling like white lies, covering the ugly truths beneath. Chiana Joseph prepared what she knew would be either the most beautiful dinner of their marriage or its funeral feast. And either way, it would be magnificent. The Lucas kitchen had been transformed into a command center of culinary excellence. Chiana moved through the space with the precision of a master chef and the strategic thinking of a general preparing for battle. Every dish she prepared carried cultural significance. Every flavor combination told a story about the diverse relationships she'd built during her years of anonymous diplomatic work for Lucas Luxury Tours. The herb-crusted lamb represented the Moroccan artisans who taught her traditional spice blending during her first international research trip. The handmade pasta honored the Italian cooking school she'd attended, to better understand regional food traditions for their Mediterranean tours. The spiced wine recipe came from a German Christmas market owner who'd become both business partner and friend during her negotiations for their European cultural experiences. Samuel descended the stairs at nearly 10 o'clock, his hair perfectly styled and his expression carrying the relaxed confidence of a man who'd never had to worry about Christmas dinner preparations. He was dressed in expensive casual wear that managed to look both effortless and precisely calculated. The uniform of someone who understood that image was often more important than substance. "Something smells incredible down here." "Aye," he said, moving through the kitchen without offering to help. His attention focused on his phone rather than the elaborate meal preparation happening around him. "I've got 3 important calls to make before people start arriving, so I'll be in my office until at least noon." Noah looked up from where he was carefully folding napkins with origami precision, a skill Chiana had taught him during their exploration of Japanese cultural traditions. His 9-year-old face showed the kind of disappointment that children feel when adults consistently prioritize work over family, especially on days meant for celebration. "Daddy, it's Christmas Eve. Can't the calls wait until next week?" Samuel ruffled his son's hair with absent affection. "Business doesn't stop for holidays, buddy. Daddy's got to take care of the important stuff so we can afford all these nice things." The casual dismissal of family time in favor of important stuff hit Chiana like a slap, not because it was unusual, but because it perfectly encapsulated the hierarchy of values that had shaped their marriage. Samuel's work was important. Samuel's recognition was important. Samuel's reputation was important. Everything else, including the people who made his success possible, was secondary. "What calls are so urgent they can't wait one day?" Chiana asked, her tone carefully neutral but her eyes sharp with curiosity. "Legal stuff. Contracts for next year. Some partnership discussions that could be really big for us." He paused, seeming to catch himself before revealing too much. "Nothing you need to worry about, sweetheart. Just business." The phrase "just business" had become Samuel's standard deflection whenever Chiana asked questions about decisions that would affect their future. It was his way of maintaining the fiction that she was uninvolved in the strategic aspects of Lucas luxury tours, while simultaneously benefiting from her behind-the-scenes contributions. As Samuel disappeared into his office, Chiana's phone began buzzing with messages that painted a very different picture of what was happening in their business world. Text after text from international partners, cultural contacts, and industry leaders, all wishing her personally a happy holiday and expressing excitement about working with her in the coming year. Message from their largest European client made her stop chopping vegetables and read more carefully. "Chiana, we've been thinking about our conversation regarding sustainable tourism development. Our board is very interested in exploring a direct partnership with you for our new cultural preservation initiative. Would you be available for a call next week to discuss terms?" Another message, this one from a cultural center director in South America. "Mrs. Joseph, thank you for your guidance on our artisan program proposal. We've decided to move forward with the project and would love to have you as our primary consultant. The compensation package we're prepared to offer reflects the value we place on your expertise." Each message represented recognition she'd never received through Lucas Luxury Tours, opportunities that valued her specific skills rather than her supporting role in Samuel's narrative. More importantly, they demonstrated that the tourism industry's key players understood exactly who was responsible for the cultural sensitivity and ethical practices that had become Lucas Luxury Tours' signature advantage. Noah finished his napkin folding and moved to help her with vegetable preparation, his small hands working alongside hers with comfortable familiarity. "Mama, why do all those people text you instead of Daddy if it's his business?" The question was innocent, but penetrating, the kind of observation that cuts through adult pretenses to reveal uncomfortable truths. Because sometimes the person whose name is on the company isn't the same person who does the most important work. That seems backward. It is backward, but that's how it's been for a long time. Are you going to keep letting it be backward? Kiana paused in her chopping, struck by the challenge embedded in her son's question. At 9 years old, Noah was already developing a sophisticated understanding of fairness and justice that wouldn't allow him to accept inequity simply because it was familiar or convenient. "No, baby, I don't think I am." The sound of Samuel's raised voice carried from his office, his tone taking on the aggressive edge he used when he felt his authority was being questioned. Chiana moved closer to the door, not to eavesdrop, but to gauge whether his mood would affect the family gathering they'd planned for the evening. "I don't care what she told you," Samuel was saying. "All partnership discussions need to go through me. She might have some useful insights. But I'm the CEO, and all contracts have to have my approval." The conversation continued with Samuel becoming increasingly agitated about what seemed to be a challenge to his control over business relationships. Chiana realized with growing clarity that the urgent calls weren't about new opportunities, but about maintaining his grip on partnerships that were beginning to bypass him entirely. When Samuel emerged from his office an hour later, his expression was tight with poorly concealed frustration. "Did anyone call the house asking for you?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp with suspicion. "A few holiday greetings from business contacts," Chiana replied truthfully, watching his reaction carefully. "Why? ABS. Just checking. Some of our partners seem confused about reporting structures. I had to clarify a few things about chain of command." The euphemism was telling. Samuel wasn't clarifying chain of command. He was desperately trying to reassert control over relationships that had evolved beyond his oversight. The international contacts who worked with Lucas Luxury Tours had gradually shifted their communication to Kiana because she was the one who understood their needs, spoke their languages, and delivered results. As the afternoon progressed and family members began arriving for their Christmas Eve gathering, Chiana noticed Samuel's increasing agitation. He moved through their home, like a man trying to maintain control of a situation that was slipping away from him, his smile growing more forced with each hour. The first guests to arrive were Samuel's parents, who swept in with their usual combination of grand parental affection and subtle criticism. Samuel's mother surveyed the elaborate meal preparations with the kind of proprietary approval that suggested she viewed Chiana's domestic efforts as a reflection of her son's successful training. "This all looks lovely, dear," she said, her tone carrying the faint condescension of someone offering praise to a child. "Samuel is so lucky to have someone who takes such good care of the household duties while he focuses on the important business matters." Noah looked up sharply at the dismissive characterization of his mother's work, his young face showing an expression of protective indignation that made Chiana's heart swell with pride and ache with worry simultaneously. "Mama does important business stuff too," he said firmly. "She's the one who knows all the languages and talks to the people in other countries and makes the tours work." "Right," Samuel's mother laughed, with the kind of patronizing amusement adults reserve for children who say cute but irrelevant things. "Oh, sweetheart, I'm sure your mama helps your daddy in lots of little ways. That's what good wives do." The phrase "little ways" hung in the air like poison gas, its toxic implications clear to everyone except perhaps the woman who'd spoken it. Chiana felt Noah's hand slip into hers, a gesture of solidarity that reminded her that her son was watching how she responded to being diminished, learning lessons about self-respect and dignity that would shape his entire approach to relationships. "Actually," Chiana said, her voice carrying a new note of steel that made several people look up in surprise, "I think you might be interested to know exactly what those little ways include." Samuel's head snapped toward her. his expression shifting from casual annoyance to something approaching alarm. He could hear the change in her tone, could sense that something fundamental was shifting in their carefully maintained dynamic. "Sweetheart," he said quickly, "I'm sure Mom doesn't need to hear all the details about work stuff." But Chiana was already reaching for her purse, already pulling out the folder she'd prepared that morning. The moment she'd been building toward all day had arrived, and she could feel the power of truth gathering in her chest like a storm about to break. "Actually, I think she does need to hear the details. I think everyone needs to hear exactly what my little ways have contributed to Samuel's big success." The room fell silent as Chiana opened her folder and prepared to reveal secrets that would change everything. The last Christmas Eve of lies was about to become the first Christmas Eve of truth, and everyone present was about to discover what happened when a woman stopped protecting a man's ego and started protecting her own dignity. What Samuel didn't realize as he watched his wife prepare to speak was that he'd spent years building his reputation on a foundation he didn't own. And foundations built on lies have a tendency to crumble when the truth finally decides to surface. Chapter 5. The Dinner of Damned Souls. As Chiana Joseph lit the Christmas candles that had blessed their marriage table for 10 years, she wasn't praying for miracles or harmony. She was igniting the fuse that would either save her soul or destroy the illusion that had been slowly killing it. The dining room had been transformed into something approaching art. Chiana's cultural sensibilities and attention to detail had created an atmosphere that honored traditions from around the world while maintaining elegant cohesion. The table settings mixed Moroccan brass chargers with Irish crystal glasses, Mexican hand-painted ceramics with Italian linen napkins. Each element told a story about relationships she'd built and knowledge she'd acquired during her years of invisible diplomatic work. Samuel sat at the head of the table, his position reinforcing the family hierarchy that had never been questioned or examined. He was holding court with stories about Lucas Luxury Tour's latest successes, each anecdote polished through repetition until it gleamed with the artificial perfection of a marketing presentation. The key to our international expansion, he was explaining to his attentive audience, has been my ability to understand what different cultures value most deeply. When we designed our new African heritage tours, I spent weeks researching traditional customs and building relationships with local leaders. Chiana continued serving the elaborate meal she'd prepared, moving between kitchen and dining room with fluid grace, while Samuel's voice washed over the gathering like background music. She'd heard these stories dozens of times, had watched him refine and perfect them until his own role expanded while hers disappeared entirely. Noah sat beside her, his intelligent eyes moving between his parents with the kind of awareness that made Chiana simultaneously proud and worried. He was old enough to recognize the disconnection between the stories his father told and the reality he'd witnessed, young enough to expect adults to tell the truth about important things. Tell them about the ceremony in Morocco. "Daddy," Noah said suddenly, his voice cutting through Samuel's monologue with innocent directness. "Tell them how Mama learned the traditional welcoming dance and why the village elders said she had the spirit of a true diplomat." The request landed in the conversation like a small bomb, creating a moment of silence that stretched just long enough to become uncomfortable. Samuel's expression shifted almost imperceptibly, a flash of irritation quickly concealed behind his practiced smile. "That was a great trip," he said smoothly, not addressing the specific details Noah had mentioned. "The cultural immersion experiences we offer really set us apart from other tour companies." But Noah wasn't satisfied with the deflection. "Mama, tell them about how you learned Arabic so you could talk to the craftsmen directly, and how they taught you the secret spice combinations that no other tour company knows about." Chiana felt every eye at the table turn toward her, waiting for her response to her son's invitation to claim credit for her own achievements. The moment felt suspended in amber, pregnant with possibilities that could reshape their family's entire narrative or preserve the comfortable lies that had sustained Samuel's ego for years. "Noah remembers everything," she said carefully, her tone light, but her eyes holding depths that hadn't been there at the beginning of the meal. "He has a gift for noticing details that adults sometimes overlook." Samuel's business partner leaned forward with interest that seemed genuine rather than polite. "I'd love to hear more about those relationships with local craftsmen. Our clients are always asking for authentic experiences that go beyond the typical tourist activities." The question was directed to Chiana specifically, acknowledging her as the source of expertise rather than deferring to Samuel's assumed authority. She felt the weight of choice settling on her shoulders like a ceremonial robe, heavy with significance and responsibility. "The artisans we work with have become genuine friends over the years," she began, her voice gaining confidence as she spoke about work she'd actually done rather than supporting someone else's fiction. Building those relationships required learning not just languages, but cultural protocols, understanding religious sensitivities, and demonstrating consistent respect for traditional practices. Samuel's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he maintained his smile while reaching for his wine glass with slightly more force than necessary. Chiana has always been great with the cultural stuff. She has a natural intuition for that kind of thing. The dismissive phrase "natural intuition" was meant to minimize her expertise, to suggest that her success came from innate feminine sensitivity rather than education, training, and professional skill. But several guests seemed to recognize the condescension embedded in his compliment. "Actually," said Samuel's father, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being heard, "I've been wondering about something. Some of the men at my club mentioned hearing about Lucas Luxury Tours' cultural programs, and they seemed to think Chiana was more directly involved in operations than we've understood." The comment was phrased as curiosity, but its implications were clear. Samuel's reputation in certain circles was beginning to depend on questions about his wife's actual role in the business, and those questions were making people uncomfortable with the narrative they'd been fed. Samuel's mother rushed to defend her son with the fierce loyalty of someone whose identity was tied to his success. "Oh, I'm sure that's just people misunderstanding how modern marriages work. Chiana supports Samuel's work beautifully, but he's obviously the one with the business expertise and international experience." The assertion hung in the air like a challenge, creating a moment when truth and fiction stood facing each other across the dinner table. Chiana felt Noah's hand touch hers under the table, a gesture of solidarity that reminded her that her response would teach him lessons about courage, honesty, and self-respect that would shape his entire approach to life. "Actually," Chiana said, her voice steady but carrying a new note of authority that made several people straighten in their chairs, "I think there might be some confusion about where that international experience and business expertise actually came from." Samuel's expression shifted from annoyance to something approaching alarm. "Sweetheart, I don't think everyone needs to hear all the boring details about how businesses operate." But Chiana was already reaching for the folder she'd kept beside her chair throughout dinner. The collection of documents that would transform this Christmas Eve celebration into something none of them would ever forget. "Oh, I don't think these details are boring at all," she said, opening the folder with movements that spoke of decision rather than impulse. "In fact, I think they're the most interesting part of the whole Lucas Luxury Tours story." The shift in atmosphere was immediate and dramatic. Conversations stopped, forks paused halfway to mouths, and everyone's attention focused on Chiana with the intensity reserved for moments when something significant was about to happen. Samuel made one last attempt to control the narrative that was slipping away from him. "Chiana, maybe we should save the business talk for after dinner. This is supposed to be a family celebration. But Noah was watching his mother with pride and anticipation, his young face glowing with the excitement of someone about to witness justice being served. "No, Daddy. I want to hear Mama tell everyone about all the important work she does." The support from her 9-year-old son gave Chiana the final push she needed to step out of the shadows and into the light she'd earned through years of uncredited brilliance. "You're right. Noah, it's time everyone heard the truth about who built this empire and how it really happened." As she pulled out the first document, a handwritten business plan that bore her signature and none of Samuel's input, Kiana Joseph prepared to detonate the carefully constructed fiction that had made her husband famous while keeping her invisible. The family that had gathered to celebrate Samuel's success was about to discover that they'd been worshipping at the wrong altar, and the real architect of their prosperity was finally ready to accept the recognition she'd always deserved. Chapter 6. The King's Fatal Move. When Samuel Lucas raised his champagne glass to toast his own brilliance, he had no idea he was about to trigger a revelation that would transform his wife from silent supporter into the most dangerous woman in his carefully constructed world. The moment came without warning, like lightning striking during what had seemed like a peaceful storm. Samuel stood from his chair with the fluid confidence of a man accustomed to commanding attention, his champagne glass catching the candlelight as he prepared to deliver what he clearly believed would be the evening's defining moment. "I want to propose a toast," he announced, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone who'd given countless speeches to countless audiences. "To family, to success, and to the exciting new chapter that's about to begin for Lucas Luxury Tours." The phrasing was carefully chosen, meaningfully vague, designed to sound celebratory while concealing the specific changes he had planned. But Chiana caught the undertone of finality in his words, the subtle suggestion that something was ending as well as beginning. Samuel's expression shifted as he warmed to his theme, his features taking on the animated enthusiasm he displayed when discussing his favorite subject, himself. "This year has been incredible for us. 3 major industry awards, expansion into new markets, recognition as one of the top cultural tourism companies in the world. And I'm excited to announce that next year is going to be even bigger." He paused for effect, letting the anticipation build around the table. "I've been in negotiations for a partnership that will take Lucas Luxury Tours to the next level. A chance to focus completely on what I do best: innovation, leadership, and building the kind of experiences that change people's lives." Kiana felt something cold settle in her stomach as she began to understand the direction of Samuel's announcement. The exciting new chapter wasn't about growth or expansion. It was about consolidation and elimination. "Of course," Samuel continued, his tone becoming more personal and ostensibly intimate. "This kind of growth requires some difficult decisions about priorities and focus. I've realized that I've been held back by trying to balance too many responsibilities, trying to be everything to everyone, instead of concentrating on my core strengths." The euphemisms were becoming clearer with each word. Samuel wasn't talking about business restructuring. He was talking about personal restructuring. He was preparing to announce changes that would affect not just Lucas Luxury Tours, but their marriage and their family. Noah was listening with the intense concentration he brought to adult conversations he sensed were important, his young face showing growing confusion and concern. "What kind of difficult decisions, Daddy?" Samuel's smile became strained, the expression of someone who hadn't anticipated having to explain complex adult machinations to a child's direct questions. "Just business stuff, buddy. Grown-up things that would be boring for you to hear about." But Kiana was no longer willing to let Samuel's euphemisms and deflections pass unchallenged. "Actually, I think Noah has a right to understand decisions that will affect our family's future. Why don't you explain exactly what kind of exciting new chapter you're planning?" The question was phrased as support, but its tone carried enough steel to make several guests look up in surprise. Samuel's eyes flicked toward her with something approaching warning, a look that said she was venturing into territory he considered exclusively his. "Sweetheart, maybe we should discuss the details privately before involving everyone else in business decisions." "Oh, I think everyone should hear this," Kiana replied, her voice maintaining its pleasant tone while her eyes communicated something much more dangerous. "Especially since these business decisions seem to involve my future as well as yours." The tension at the table had shifted from anticipation to something approaching alarm. Samuel's parents were looking between their son and daughter-in-law with the confusion of people watching a familiar script suddenly veer into uncharted territory. Samuel made a visible effort to regain control of the situation, his smile becoming more forced, but his voice maintaining its authoritative cadence. "What I'm trying to say is that I've been offered an opportunity to partner with some major players in the industry. It would mean streamlining operations, focusing on core competencies, and eliminating some of the complications that have been slowing down our growth." The word complications landed like a slap. Gianna felt Noah's hand slip into hers under the table, a gesture of solidarity that gave her strength while breaking her heart. "What kind of complications?" she asked, her voice still pleasant, but her eyes now blazing with controlled fury. Samuel's father cleared his throat with the authority of someone accustomed to resolving family disputes through patriarchal intervention. "Perhaps this conversation would be better continued in private. Christmas Eve doesn't seem like the appropriate time for business disagreements." But Samuel seemed to have passed the point of strategic thinking, driven by some combination of alcohol, ego, and the desperate need to justify decisions he'd already made. "No, it's fine. Everyone here is family or close friends. They should understand what's happening." He turned back to Chiana, his expression becoming more direct and significantly less kind. "The truth is, darling, that this partnership requires a certain level of professional focus that's been difficult to maintain while trying to balance family obligations and domestic responsibilities. The new partners want to work with someone who can give the business 100% of their attention." The implication was becoming unmistakable. Samuel wasn't just talking about restructuring the business. He was talking about restructuring his life to eliminate the family obligations that he saw as impediments to his success. "So you're saying that Noah and I are complications that need to be eliminated?" Kiana asked, her voice still controlled, but carrying a quality that made everyone at the table suddenly very alert. Samuel's expression hardened, his mask of jovial authority finally slipping to reveal something much uglier underneath. "I'm saying that I've sacrificed enough of my potential to maintain a situation that isn't working for anyone. You've always been focused on domestic concerns and cultural hobbies, rather than understanding the serious business of building a real company. This partnership gives me a chance to work with people who share my vision and my commitment to excellence." The words hit the table like bombs, each phrase designed to diminish Kiana's contributions while elevating Samuel's narrative of personal sacrifice. Around the table, faces showed shock at his casual cruelty, but Samuel seemed intoxicated by his own righteousness, his voice growing more confident with each devastating phrase. But he wasn't finished with his character assassination. "I've tried to be patient, to find ways to include you in the business, despite your lack of formal training or real understanding of international commerce. The truth is that successful men need partners who elevate them, not anchor them to mediocrity. Lucas Luxury Tours has succeeded in spite of domestic distractions. Not because of them." Samuel's father shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the echoes of his own dismissive attitudes toward women in his son's words. Samuel's business partner stared at his plate, clearly disturbed by this public humiliation, of a woman he'd privately acknowledged as the company's strategic genius. Even the family members who'd never particularly valued Chiana's contributions seemed stunned by the calculated cruelty of Samuel's attack on the mother of his child. Chiana sat perfectly still, her composure more terrifying than screaming would have been. Around the table, faces showed various degrees of shock, embarrassment, and growing understanding that they were witnessing something that would change everything. Samuel reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope that had clearly been prepared in advance. "I've had legal papers drawn up that will make this transition as smooth as possible for everyone involved. Clean breaks are always better than prolonged situations that aren't working." He placed the envelope on the table in front of Chiana, with movements that suggested he'd rehearsed this moment, planned it as carefully as any business presentation. "Divorce papers," he said simply, "and documentation that clearly establishes my ownership of Lucas Luxury Tours and all associated assets. I think you'll find the settlement offer is quite generous, considering your actual contributions to the business." The silence that followed was absolute and devastating. Noah's grip on Chiana's hand tightened, his 9-year-old mind processing the reality that his father had just publicly destroyed their family with the casual efficiency of a business transaction. But as Samuel waited for shock, tears, or desperate negotiation, something very different began to emanate from Chiana's perfectly controlled presence. Not defeat or heartbreak, but a quality of power that had been building all evening and was finally ready to be unleashed. She looked at the divorce papers, then at Samuel's expectant face, then at her son's heartbroken expression. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a quality that made everyone lean forward. "Samuel, you've just made the biggest mistake of your life, and I'm about to show you exactly why." She reached for her own folder, the one she'd prepared that morning, and placed it on the table beside his legal documents. Because before you eliminate the complications from your life, you might want to understand exactly what those complications have been contributing to your success. Samuel's confident expression began to falter as he realized that his wife's surrender was not going to be as automatic as he'd assumed, and that the woman he'd just publicly humiliated was about to become very dangerous indeed. The king had just declared war on his most powerful ally, and he was about to discover that queens don't abdicate their thrones without taking their kingdoms with them. Chapter 7. The Queen's Silent Revolution. Chiana Joseph had been silent through 10 years of stolen credit and diminished worth, but when she finally opened her mouth to speak the truth on Christmas Eve, her words carried the accumulated power of a decade's worth of buried brilliance. The folder Chiana opened contained more than documents. It contained the dismantled pieces of Samuel's entire professional identity. Each page represented proof that the empire he claimed to have built single-handedly was actually the product of her vision, her relationships, and her strategic genius. "Before we discuss eliminating complications," Chiana began, her voice carrying a quality of controlled authority that made everyone at the table sit straighter, "I think it's important that everyone understands exactly what Lucas Luxury Tours really is and who actually built it." She pulled out the first document with ceremonial precision. Her original business plan, handwritten on legal pad paper, dated 3 months before Samuel had supposedly conceived his revolutionary tourism concept. This is the foundational document for what became Lucas Luxury Tours, the sustainable tourism model, the cultural immersion philosophy, the ethical partnership framework, all of it outlined here in my handwriting, based on my research and my anthropological training. Samuel's face had gone pale, but he made a desperate attempt to maintain control. "Sweetheart, those are just notes from our brainstorming sessions. I obviously developed those concepts into a viable business model." Chiana smiled with the serene confidence of someone holding a royal flush. "Is that so?" Then you'll be able to explain the cultural sensitivity protocols outlined on page 7, which require specific knowledge of Islamic banking principles, Hindu calendar systems, and indigenous land rights legislation. The silence that greeted this challenge was deafening. Samuel's business expertise had always been more about presentation than substance, more about networking than knowledge. He could deliver compelling speeches about concepts Chiana had taught him, but he couldn't explain the complex cultural and legal frameworks that made those concepts actually work. "Samuel," his father said slowly, his voice carrying a note of concern, "perhaps you should let Chiana explain these technical details herself." But Chiana was already moving to her next piece of evidence, a thick folder filled with correspondence that told the real story of Lucas Luxury Tours' international expansion. "These are emails between me and cultural centers, artisan cooperatives, and government tourism boards across 6 continents, all written in the appropriate languages, all demonstrating deep understanding of local customs and regulatory requirements, all signed with my name and credentials." She spread several emails across the table, each one bearing her signature and revealing detailed negotiations that had secured Lucas Luxury Tours its most profitable partnerships. "Here's my correspondence with the Moroccan Artisan Guild, conducted entirely in Arabic, establishing the exclusive partnership that became our most successful North African tour package. Here's my negotiation with Peruvian cultural authorities, conducted in Spanish with specific attention to indigenous rights protocols, that opened up the Andes experiences Samuel likes to brag about." Each document was a dagger thrust into Samuel's narrative of personal achievement. His guests were beginning to look at him, with expressions that ranged from confusion to something approaching accusation. Noah was watching the proceedings with fascination and growing pride, his young mind finally seeing his mother receive the recognition he'd always known she deserved. "Tell them about the language learning, Mama," he said with the directness that only children can achieve. "Tell them how you learned 6 languages so you could talk to people directly instead of using translators." Chiana's smile toward her son was radiant with maternal love and appreciation for his support. "Noah's right. Sustainable cultural tourism requires direct communication with local communities. Over the past 8 years, I've achieved conversational fluency in Arabic, Spanish, French, Italian, Portuguese, and Mandarin. I've also studied the basics of 12 other languages to show respect when visiting different regions." Samuel's business partner was staring at the document spread across the table with the expression of someone watching his understanding of reality shift fundamentally. "Chiana, are you saying that you personally conducted all the international negotiations for Lucas Luxury Tours?" "Not all of them," Chiana replied with careful precision. "Samuel has always been excellent at the final presentations and contract signings. But the research, the relationship building, the cultural preparation, the protocol development, and the ongoing partnership maintenance, yes, that's been my responsibility." She pulled out another section of her folder, financial records that painted an even more devastating picture of Samuel's actual contributions. These spreadsheets show the revenue generated by each tour package, correlated with the partnerships I developed. Over the past 5 years, programs based on my cultural relationships have generated 87% of Lucas Luxury Tours' profits. The number hung in the air like a bomb. Samuel had built his reputation on managing a company that was almost entirely dependent on his wife's expertise and relationships. Samuel's mother made a weak attempt to defend her son's honor. But surely Samuel's business leadership and marketing expertise were essential to turning your cultural knowledge into profitable operations. Chiana's next documents answered that challenge with brutal efficiency. Marketing materials, website content, and promotional strategies, all bearing her fingerprints and demonstrating her understanding of how to translate cultural authenticity into commercial success. "Samuel has indeed been crucial to our success," she acknowledged with devastating generosity. "He's been an excellent spokesperson for ideas he didn't develop, a charismatic presenter of concepts he didn't understand, and a confident representative of expertise he didn't possess." The systematic destruction of Samuel's professional identity was methodical and irrefutable. With each document, each piece of evidence, Chiana was revealing that Lucas Luxury Tours was essentially her consulting business operating under his name and leadership. But she wasn't finished. Her final folder contained the most damaging evidence of all: recordings and written proof of Samuel's own admissions about the true source of his success. "I think you'll find this particularly interesting," she said, pulling out her phone and connecting it to the small speaker system she'd installed for dinner music. "These are recordings of Samuel's private conversations with friends and business associates. Over the past 2 years, Samuel's expression shifted from embarrassment to genuine fear as he realized what was about to be revealed." The first recording began to play, Samuel's voice clear and unmistakable. "Yeah, Chiana does all the real cultural work. I honestly don't know how she keeps track of all those different customs and languages. I just show up for the meetings and close the deals." The second recording was even more damaging. "The truth is, she's got this incredible ability to connect with people from completely different backgrounds. I've learned to just let her handle all the complex negotiations and then take credit for the results." And the third recording delivered the final blow. "I've been thinking about restructuring the business to minimize her role. The new partners I'm talking to don't need to know how dependent we've been on her expertise. It'll be easier to maintain control if everyone thinks the success came from my business acumen." The silence that followed the recordings was absolute and crushing. Samuel sat frozen in his chair, his face cycling through expressions of shock, fear, and desperate calculation as he tried to find some way to recover from his own recorded confessions. But Chiana was still not finished with her revolution. She had one final piece of evidence that would ensure Samuel's complete defeat and her own vindication. "And finally," she said, reaching for the last document in her folder, "I have something that will interest everyone here very much." She pulled out a legal document that made Samuel's face go completely white with terror. "Joint ownership papers for Lucas Luxury Tours, filed with the state 3 years ago when I provided the capital for our major expansion. Apparently, while Samuel was planning to eliminate me from the business, he forgot that I already own 51% of it." The revelation that Chiana was not just the architect of Lucas Luxury Tours' success, but also its majority owner, created a silence so profound that the sound of breathing seemed loud in the elegant dining room. Samuel's revolution had just been revealed as a coup attempt against the actual ruler of the kingdom he thought he controlled. And everyone present understood that they had just witnessed the moment when the real queen finally decided to claim her throne. The man who had planned to eliminate his wife from their business had just discovered that she didn't need his permission to continue it, and that his entire identity was built on assets he didn't actually own. Chapter 8. The Empire's True Foundation. As the devastating truth of Chiana's legal ownership settled over the Christmas Eve gathering like revelation itself, even the candlelight seemed to burn brighter, illuminating the magnificent irony of a man who had tried to steal what already belonged to someone else. The joint ownership papers passed from hand to hand, around the table, with the solemnity of sacred relics being examined by newly converted believers. Each guest who studied the documents experienced their own moment of understanding that everything they thought they knew about Lucas Luxury Tours' success story had been fundamentally wrong. Samuel sat motionless in his chair, his face cycling through stages of shock, denial, and growing horror as the implications of Chiana's revelation began to penetrate his consciousness. The confident man who had stood to toast his own brilliance just minutes earlier had been replaced by someone who looked like he was watching his entire world collapse in real time. "This can't be right," he said finally, his voice carrying the desperate quality of someone grasping for any explanation that would restore his version of reality. "There must be some mistake in the paperwork. I would have remembered signing joint ownership documents." Kiana's smile held the patient kindness of a teacher helping a slow student understand a difficult concept. "You did sign them, Samuel. 3 years ago, when the business needed capital for the major expansion into Asian markets. I provided the investment funding from my trust fund, and the lawyers properly documented my increased ownership stake." The trust fund was news to everyone at the table, except Noah, who had overheard enough adult conversations to understand that his mother had resources independent of his father's business success. It was another piece of the puzzle that Samuel had never shared with his family, another aspect of Chiana's identity that he'd kept invisible to maintain his narrative of being her financial provider and protector. Samuel's father was studying the ownership documents with the careful attention of someone who understood legal implications. "These papers appear to be properly filed and legally binding. Chiana, are you saying that you've been the majority owner of Lucas Luxury Tours for 3 years? "Yes, I have. Samuel retained operational control and public representation, but the legal structure has reflected my primary financial investment and my strategic contributions to the company's development." The revelation transformed everyone's understanding, not just of Lucas Luxury Tours' ownership structure, but of the power dynamics that had shaped Samuel and Chiana's marriage. The supportive wife who needed her husband's financial protection had actually been the primary investor in their shared success. Samuel's business partner was looking at him with an expression that suggested years of assumptions were being rapidly re-evaluated. "Samuel, were you aware of this ownership structure when you entered into negotiations with potential new partners?" The question hit its target with precision. Samuel's face flushed as he realized that his planned business restructuring had been based on authority he didn't actually possess. "The ownership percentages weren't relevant to the partnership discussions," he said defensively. "The new investors were interested in working with me based on my operational leadership and industry reputation." Kiana's soft laugh carried more power than shouting would have. "Actually, Samuel, that's not quite accurate. I've been in direct communication with the investors you mentioned, and their interest has always been in acquiring access to my cultural expertise and international relationships." She pulled out her phone and scrolled to a recent email chain that made Samuel's remaining color drain completely from his face. "In fact, they approached me directly 6 months ago with an offer to buy out your operational role and establish me as the sole CEO of Lucas Luxury Tours. I've been considering their proposal as an alternative to the domestic restructuring you were planning." The systematic destruction of Samuel's assumptions about his own importance was reaching its climax. Not only did he not own the business, he'd planned to leverage for his new partnership, but the partners he'd thought were courting him had actually been trying to eliminate him from the equation entirely. Noah was watching the proceedings with the fascination of someone witnessing justice being served in the most spectacular way possible. "Mama, does this mean you could fire Daddy from your company?" The innocent question from their 9-year-old soon crystallized the power shift that had occurred around the dinner table. Samuel Lucas, who had begun the evening as the successful CEO, offering his wife a generous divorce settlement, had been revealed as a minority partner who could be removed from his position at the majority owner's discretion. "Technically, yes," Chiana replied to her son's question, her voice gentle, but her meaning unmistakable. "But firing people is usually a last resort when other solutions don't work." Samuel's mother made a desperate attempt to salvage her son's dignity through maternal intervention. Surely this is all just a misunderstanding that can be worked out privately. Marriage difficulties shouldn't be resolved through business disputes. But Chiana's response demonstrated that this situation had moved far beyond typical marital disagreements into territory that would require fundamental changes to their relationship dynamics. "I agree that marriage difficulties should be resolved privately," she said. "But when someone attempts to eliminate me from a business I own and have built through my own expertise, that becomes a matter of protecting my professional interests and my family's financial security." She gestured toward the divorce papers Samuel had presented with such confidence earlier in the evening. "These documents propose a settlement that would give me a small fraction of what I actually own, while allowing Samuel to retain control of assets that are legally mine. That's not a marriage difficulty, that's attempted theft." The accusation hung in the air with devastating clarity. Samuel hadn't just been planning to divorce his wife. He'd been planning to defraud her of property and business assets that belonged to her both legally and ethically. Samuel's father was beginning to understand the magnitude of his son's miscalculation. "Samuel, did you consult with a lawyer about the ownership structure before drawing up these divorce papers?" The question revealed another layer of Samuel's incompetence. He'd been so confident of his control over their shared assets that he'd never bothered to verify his legal position before planning Chiana's elimination from their business and their marriage. "I assumed that operational control implied ownership," Samuel said weakly, his voice carrying the deflated quality of someone whose fundamental assumptions about reality had been proven wrong. Chiana's business expertise was becoming more apparent with each revelation. Operational control and ownership are completely different legal concepts, Samuel. The fact that you've been managing day-to-day operations doesn't override the documented ownership structure or my legal rights as majority stakeholder. As the dinner guests absorbed the full implications of what they'd witnessed, the atmosphere in the room shifted from shocked silence to something approaching awe. They were in the presence of a woman who had been systematically underestimated, and who was now revealing the true extent of her power and intelligence. Samuel made one final desperate attempt to regain some control over the narrative that had escaped his grasp completely. "Even if the legal paperwork shows joint ownership, everyone knows that I've been the public face of Lucas Luxury Tours. My reputation and relationships are what give the company its value." Chiana's response was swift and devastating. "Your reputation is built entirely on my work, and your relationships are with clients who have been asking to work directly with me for years. The company's value comes from cultural expertise you don't possess and international partnerships you didn't create." She pulled out her phone again and began reading from recent messages that had been arriving throughout their Christmas Eve gathering. "Here's a text from our largest European client. Chiana, we're excited to discuss expanding our partnership with you directly for next year's programs. Here's an email from the African Cultural Heritage Council. Mrs. Joseph, we would be honored to have you lead our new sustainable tourism initiative. And here's a voice message from the International Tourism Development Board. We'd like to offer you the position of Director of Cultural Relations, reporting directly to our Executive Committee." Each message represented recognition and opportunities that bypassed Samuel entirely, acknowledgement of Chiana's expertise from organizations that understood exactly who was responsible for Lucas Luxury Tours' success. Samuel was beginning to understand that his planned elimination of Chiana from their business wasn't just legally impossible, it was professionally suicidal. Without her expertise, her relationships, and her cultural credibility, Lucas Luxury Tours would become just another generic travel company with nothing distinctive to offer in an oversaturated market. But Chiana wasn't finished revealing the scope of her power and the depth of Samuel's miscalculations. Actually, there's one more thing everyone should know about the exciting new chapter Samuel mentioned in his toast, she said, reaching for one final document that would complete his humiliation. I've already accepted the position with the International Tourism Development Board, effective next month. I'll be maintaining my ownership of Lucas Luxury Tours while also serving as a senior advisor to tourism organizations worldwide. The announcement that Chiana had secured her own international position while Samuel was planning their domestic restructuring revealed the vast difference in their respective professional prospects and industry standing. Samuel's carefully planned future had just been revealed as a fantasy built on assets he didn't own and relationships he hadn't created, while Chiana's actual future promised expansion, recognition, and independence he couldn't threaten or control. The Empress had not just defended her throne. She had revealed that she commanded an empire larger than anyone had imagined, and the man who had tried to overthrow her was discovering that he had never been anything more than a figurehead in his own supposed kingdom. Chapter 9. The Audio of Destruction. The final weapon in Chiana's arsenal wasn't documents or legal papers, but Samuel's own voice, captured over months of private conversations, proving that even he understood exactly whose genius had built the empire he claimed as his legacy. Chiana's phone connected to the speaker system with a soft click that somehow seemed to echo through the silent dining room like the sound of a guillotine blade being raised. Every face around the table reflected the understanding that they were about to witness something that would permanently alter their perception of Samuel Lucas and his celebrated success story. "Before I play these recordings," Chiana said, her voice carrying the measured tone of someone delivering a legal verdict, "I want everyone to understand that I didn't set out to document Samuel's private admissions about our business relationship. These conversations were recorded during business calls when he forgot I was monitoring our home phone system for international client communications." The explanation demonstrated another layer of Chiana's professional competence that had remained invisible throughout their marriage. She hadn't been secretly recording Samuel. She'd been performing legitimate business oversight and had inadvertently captured his unguarded moments of honesty about their partnership dynamics. Samuel's face had taken on the greyish pallor of someone watching their life implode in slow motion. He knew exactly what conversations had been captured, understood the devastating implications of his own words being played back to family and business associates who had believed his public narrative of individual achievement. The first recording is from a call Samuel made to his college roommate 6 months ago, Chiana explained, her finger hovering over the play button with the precision of an executioner. He was feeling frustrated about some business challenges and spoke more candidly than usual about our working relationship. The recording began with the tinny quality of a phone conversation, but Samuel's voice was unmistakably clear and unguarded. "Look, Mike, I'll be straight with you. This business is way more complicated than I ever imagined when we started. The cultural stuff that makes us different from other tour companies, that's all Chiana. She's got this incredible ability to connect with people from completely different backgrounds, speaks like 6 languages fluently, understands religious protocols and political sensitivities that I couldn't even pronounce correctly." The admission was devastating in its casual honesty. Samuel's own words were destroying years of carefully constructed mythology about his personal expertise and intuitive business genius. The recording continued. "I've basically learned to just let her handle all the complex international relationships, and then I show up for the final presentations to close the deals. It works out perfectly because she hates the spotlight anyway, and I'm good at the public-facing stuff." Noah was listening with the intense concentration of someone hearing their father describe their mother's work with the kind of respect he never showed in public. The boy's face reflected a mixture of vindication for his mother and disappointment in his father's duplicity. Samuel's business partner was staring at the phone with an expression of someone watching their understanding of professional relationships shift fundamentally. The colleague he'd respected for his cultural competence and international expertise was revealing himself as an elaborate fraud who'd built his reputation on his wife's uncredited abilities. Kiana advanced to the second recording, this one from a more recent conversation that captured Samuel in an even more unguarded moment of truth-telling. This conversation took place 3 months ago, during a call with a potential investor who was asking detailed questions about our operational expertise. Samuel's voice filled the room again, this time carrying a note of frustration that made his admissions even more damaging. Between you and me, I don't actually understand half the cultural protocols we follow. Kiana developed all of that framework based on her anthropology training and her field research. When clients ask me specific questions about traditional customs or religious sensitivities, I have to deflect until I can check with her privately. The recording revealed not just Samuel's dependence on Kiana's expertise, but his awareness that his public persona was a performance rather than genuine knowledge. The most chilling aspect wasn't his ignorance, but his casual amusement at deceiving clients who trusted his supposed cultural sensitivity. The worst part is that she's so good at this stuff that our clients specifically request her input on program development. I'm starting to worry that they value her contributions more than my business leadership. But here's the thing, she's too modest to ever demand credit, so I can keep taking the recognition while she does the actual work. Samuel's recorded laughter filled the room like poison, the sound of a man celebrating his own deception. Noah's young face showed pure disgust, his childhood hero worship of his father crumbling in real time as he heard the man's true character revealed in his own words. Samuel's mother was staring at the phone with the expression of someone watching her son transform into a stranger before her eyes. The woman who had spent years defending Samuel's treatment of Kiana was finally hearing the calculated nature of his exploitation, the deliberate theft of credit he knew belonged to someone else. The fear expressed in Samuel's private conversation was proving prophetic. His clients had indeed come to value Kiana's contributions more than his leadership, and his current situation was the direct result of attempting to eliminate the person who made his success possible. Samuel's mother was looking at her son with an expression of maternal disappointment that cut deeper than any professional criticism could have. "Samuel, why didn't you ever tell us how much Kiana was contributing to the business?" The question forced Samuel to confront the psychological motivations behind his systematic erasure of Kiana's role. He'd minimized her contributions, not just to maintain his public image, but to preserve his own sense of masculine authority and professional competence. But Kiana wasn't finished with her audio evidence. The third recording was the most damaging of all, capturing Samuel in a conversation that revealed the calculated nature of his planned betrayal. This final recording was made just 2 weeks ago, during a call with the business attorney who helped draft the divorce papers Samuel presented. Tonight, the last recording began with Samuel's voice speaking in the confidential tone of someone discussing strategy they knew was ethically questionable. "Look, I need to structure this divorce in a way that protects my business interests. Kiana has been involved in operations, but she doesn't have formal business training or legal expertise. I'm confident she won't understand the full implications of the settlement offer, especially if we frame it as generous compared to typical divorce agreements." The recording revealed Samuel's divorce planning as a calculated attempt to defraud Kiana of assets he knew she'd helped create. His strategy had depended on her supposed ignorance of business law and her emotional vulnerability during a marriage crisis. The key is to get her to sign quickly, before she has time to consult with independent legal counsel or investigate the company's actual valuation. Once the papers are filed, it'll be much harder for her to challenge the asset distribution. Samuel's own words were proving that his Christmas Eve announcement hadn't been an emotional decision driven by marriage difficulties, but a carefully orchestrated business maneuver designed to eliminate his most valuable partner while stealing her contributions to their shared success. The silence that followed the final recording was absolute and crushing. Samuel sat frozen in his chair, understanding that his own voice had just destroyed any possibility of explaining away his behavior as misunderstanding or business necessity. Noah was the first to break the silence, his 9-year-old voice carrying a quality of moral certainty that made every adult in the room feel ashamed of their own compromises and rationalizations. "Daddy, you were planning to steal from Mama." The simple accusation from their child cut through all the legal complexities and business justifications to identify the essential truth. Samuel had planned to take what belonged to Kiana, and had calculated that she wouldn't be sophisticated enough to stop him. Samuel's father was looking at his son with an expression of profound disappointment that went beyond business ethics into fundamental questions of character and integrity. "Samuel, how could you plan something like this against your own wife?" But Samuel was beyond explanations or justifications. The systematic destruction of his public image, professional reputation, and family relationships had left him with nothing but the desperate hope that some face-saving compromise might still be possible. "Kiana," he said, his voice carrying the pleading quality of someone who finally understood the magnitude of their miscalculation. "Surely we can work something out privately. This doesn't have to destroy everything we've built together." Kiana's response carried the finality of someone who had moved beyond forgiveness into the territory of justice and self-protection. "Samuel, you just spent the evening publicly humiliating me, announcing plans to eliminate me from a business I own, and presenting divorce papers designed to defraud me of my own assets. You've demonstrated that you view me as an obstacle to your success rather than the architect of it." She gestured toward their son, whose presence had been the most powerful witness to Samuel's character revelation. "More importantly, you've shown Noah exactly what you think of the people who love and support you. You've taught him that loyalty and partnership are weaknesses to be exploited rather than treasures to be protected." The indictment was complete and devastating. Samuel hadn't just destroyed his marriage or his business prospects. He damaged his relationship with his son and revealed himself as someone whose values were fundamentally incompatible with family loyalty or professional integrity. As the Christmas Eve gathering drew toward its conclusion, everyone present understood that they had witnessed something unprecedented: the complete demolition of a carefully constructed false identity and the revelation of a woman's true power when she finally decided to stop protecting someone else's ego at the expense of her own dignity. The king had been deposed by his own words, and the queen who had built his kingdom was finally ready to rule it in her own name. Chapter 10. The Dawn of the True Empire. As Christmas morning light streamed through the windows of a mansion where truth had finally conquered fiction, Kiana Joseph stood not as a woman seeking revenge against betrayal, but as an empress finally ready to claim the throne that had always been rightfully hers. The Christmas Eve dinner had ended with guests departing in stunned silence, their understanding of the Lucas family dynamics forever altered by the evening's revelations. Samuel's parents had left with expressions of profound disappointment, his business associates with barely concealed plans to distance themselves from his damaged reputation. The house that had been filled with celebration just hours earlier now held only the three members of a family fundamentally changed by truth. Samuel sat in his study, surrounded by legal documents that had become meaningless the moment Chiana revealed her majority ownership of the business he'd planned to steal. The divorce papers that had seemed so strategically brilliant earlier that evening now represented evidence of attempted fraud that could destroy what remained of his professional credibility. His hands shook as he stared at his phone, watching notifications pile up from business contacts who were already distancing themselves from his toxic reputation. The tourism industry was smaller than most people realized, and word of his spectacular downfall had spread through professional networks like wildfire. 3 partnership deals had been quietly withdrawn overnight. His biggest investor had sent a terse email requesting an urgent meeting to discuss leadership concerns. The man who had begun Christmas Eve as a celebrated entrepreneur was ending it as a cautionary tale about hubris and betrayal. Noah had fallen asleep on the living room sofa, emotionally exhausted by watching his father's public humiliation and his mother's magnificent vindication. Even in sleep, his small hand clutched a family photo that showed happier times, back when he'd believed his parents shared the success they'd built together. But his dreams were now filled with pride for his mother's strength rather than confusion about his father's cruelty. Chiana moved through her home with the measured grace of someone processing the magnitude of change that had occurred in a single evening. She'd entered Christmas Eve as a woman whose contributions were invisible and whose worth was systematically diminished. She was ending it as the acknowledged architect of a business empire and the rightful owner of assets worth millions. Her phone had been buzzing constantly since the dinner guests departed, messages pouring in from international contacts who had somehow learned about the evening's events. The tourism industry was smaller and more interconnected than most people realized. And news of Samuel's spectacular downfall was already spreading through professional networks worldwide. Text from the International Tourism Development Board's executive director confirmed what Chiana had suspected. "Chiana, we've been hoping you would separate your professional reputation from Lucas Luxury Tours. Your new position with us is just the beginning of what we hope will be a long partnership. Congratulations on reclaiming your rightful recognition." Another message. This one from a consortium of European cultural organizations. "Mrs. Joseph, we would be honored to discuss establishing you as the director of our new ethical tourism initiative. Your expertise in cultural preservation and sustainable development is exactly what our industry needs." A third notification made her pause with genuine surprise. "The United Nations Cultural Heritage Council would like to nominate you for our Distinguished Service Award in recognition of your groundbreaking work in sustainable tourism development. Your contributions have set the global standard for ethical cultural exchange." Each opportunity represented recognition for work Chiana had performed in anonymity, acknowledgement from organizations that understood her true value, independent of Samuel's diminished reputation. The professional future she was building would be hers alone, built on relationships she'd cultivated and expertise she'd developed through years of dedicated effort. Samuel appeared in the living room doorway, his appearance disheveled and his expression carrying the haunted quality of someone whose entire identity had been systematically demolished. His expensive clothes were wrinkled, his confident posture replaced by the slumped shoulders of a man who'd lost everything he'd thought defined his worth. "Chiana, we need to talk about what happens next." She looked up from her phone, her expression calm but distant, like someone observing a stranger rather than the man she'd been married to for over a decade. "What exactly do you think happens next, Samuel? I know tonight was difficult, but surely we can find some way to work through this privately. The business relationships we've built, the reputation we've established, The life we've created for Noah, all of that is worth preserving. The pronoun choices in Samuel's plea revealed that he still didn't fully understand the shift in power that had occurred. He was still thinking in terms of shared assets and mutual interests, still operating from the assumption that Chiana's success was somehow dependent on maintaining their partnership. The business relationships are mine, Samuel. The reputation belongs to me, and the life Noah deserves is one where his mother is respected for her actual contributions rather than diminished to protect someone else's ego. Her phone buzzed with another message. This one from a major television network. Mrs. Joseph, we'd like to feature your story on our business leadership series. Your emergence as the real architect behind Lucas Luxury Tours. Success represents exactly the kind of hidden genius our viewers want to understand. Samuel's face showed the desperate calculation of someone trying to find leverage in a situation where they held no power. But Noah needs his father. You can't just eliminate me from his life because of business disagreements. Chiana's laugh was soft, but carried no warmth. I'm not eliminating you from Noah's life. You eliminated yourself when you decided to publicly humiliate his mother and attempt to steal assets that belong to his future security. She gestured toward their sleeping son, whose peaceful expression contrasted sharply with the chaos his father had created. Noah will always have access to his father, but he'll also have a mother who owns her own business, controls her own assets, and refuses to accept diminished treatment from anyone. The sound of Noah stirring on the sofa interrupted their conversation. The boy opened his eyes and immediately focused on his parents with the kind of alertness that suggested he'd been listening even while appearing to sleep. "Mama, are you going to keep Daddy's company?" The question was innocent but profound, cutting to the heart of decisions that would shape all their futures. Chiana had spent the evening proving her ownership and expertise, but she hadn't yet announced her intentions for the business Samuel had tried to steal. "It's not Daddy's company, sweetheart. It's my company, and I built it with my own work and ideas. The question is whether I want to keep working with Daddy or build something new by myself." Noah's response reflected the moral clarity that children often possess before adults teach them to accept unfairness as inevitable. If Daddy was trying to steal from you, why would you want to keep working with him? The logic was unassailable. Samuel had demonstrated that he viewed Chiana as an obstacle to his success rather than the architect of it. Continuing their business partnership would require trusting someone who had already proven his willingness to betray their shared interests for personal advantage. "You're right, Noah. When someone shows you that they don't respect your contributions or value your partnership, it's time to build something new with people who appreciate what you bring to their success." Samuel's face showed growing desperation as he realized that Chiana wasn't just rejecting his attempted coup. She was preparing to take her expertise and relationships and build a competing empire that would render Lucas Luxury Tours irrelevant. "Chiana, please think about this carefully. If you leave, you'll be destroying everything we've built together. 10 years of work, all the employees who depend on us, all the clients who trust our brand. You'd be throwing all of that away out of anger." But Chiana's response revealed that her decision was based on strategic thinking rather than emotional reaction. "I'm not destroying what we built, Samuel. I'm taking what I built and giving it the leadership it deserves. The employees will have the opportunity to join me in a new venture where their contributions are valued and acknowledged. The clients will continue working with me because they understand who actually delivers the expertise they're paying for." She pulled out her phone and showed him messages that had been arriving. Throughout their conversation, "I've already received offers from 3 major international organizations who want to partner with me directly. The business I'm building won't compete with Lucas Luxury Tours. It will make Lucas Luxury Tours obsolete." Another notification appeared as she spoke. Harvard Business School would like to invite you to deliver our keynote address on hidden leadership, women who build empires behind the scenes. Your story has already become a case study in our graduate program. The systematic nature of Chiana's planning became clear as she outlined her vision for the future. This wasn't a reactive decision driven by hurt feelings. It was a strategic choice, made by someone who understood her own value and was ready to claim it fully. Starting January 1st, I'll be launching Joseph International Cultural Consulting with backing from the Tourism Development Board and partnership agreements already in place with organizations on 5 continents. The clients who've been asking to work with me directly will finally have that opportunity. Samuel's expression showed the moment he understood that his Christmas Eve coup attempt hadn't just failed. It had accelerated Chiana's independence and ensured his own professional irrelevance. His empire was crumbling, while hers was already rising from the ashes of his betrayal. Noah was watching his mother with pride and excitement that made her heart swell with protective love. "Mama, will your new company help people learn about different cultures like you taught me?" "Yes, sweetheart. But it will do something even more important. It will show people that when you build something with integrity and respect for others, you create success that belongs to you completely, and no one can ever take that away." As Christmas morning progressed, Chiana Joseph made the final arrangements for her transformation from invisible supporter to recognized leader. The woman who had spent years building someone else's empire was finally ready to build her own, and she would do it with the knowledge, relationships, and resources she'd accumulated through her own brilliant work. Samuel would keep the Lucas Luxury Tours name and whatever clients remained loyal to his diminished brand. But he would do it without the expertise that had made the company successful, without the relationships that had made it profitable, and without the woman whose genius had made his reputation possible. The king had lost his kingdom, but the queen had discovered that she'd never needed his crown to rule. She'd always been the empire's true foundation, and now she was ready to build something magnificent entirely in her own name. As Chiana Joseph stepped into the first day of her new life, she carried with her not just the satisfaction of justice served, but the exhilarating knowledge that her greatest achievements were still ahead of her, and this time no one would ever question who deserved the credit for building them.